What do you mean by viewing your life as an anthropologist?
So if you think about the kind of work an anthropologist does, they go and study a new culture and they observe and take notes. And they have zero assumptions, zero preconceptions about what they're going to discover. So when I talk about practicing self-anthropology, it's really the idea of pretending that you are an anthropologist, but with your own life and work as your topic of study. So you can do the exact same thing. You can pretend for 24 hours that you are an anthropologist and that you know nothing about this culture that is your own life. And you can ask questions like, what is giving me energy? What is draining my energy? Why am I behaving in this way? Why does my routine look like that? Why do I care so much about this? And again, without any kind of self judgment, you're just observing.
Sounds very mindful, and it's a mindful approach to life. How do we cultivate that mindfulness and curiosity in ourselves? And what's going on from a neuroscientific point of view there?
Yeah, the neuroscience question is actually really interesting. If you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, our brain is designed to optimize for survival. So the brain wants us to survive. And because of that, it will try to reduce uncertainty as quickly as possible. This is why we're so uncomfortable in uncertainty. If you think about our ancestors, the more certainty you had, the more information you had about your environment, the resources that were available, who were your friends, who were your enemies, then you were more likely to survive. So, what we do whenever we find ourselves in an uncertain situation is that we try to collect as much information as possible. But that comes from a place of anxiety. We almost want to have this sense of clarity, which is very often an illusion. When you have a more mindful approach, when you pretend again to be an anthropologist, that comes from a place of curiosity. You're not trying to escape the uncertainty, you're just exploring it. You're asking yourself, what's going on here? What can I learn from this? And what's great is that, you know, you cannot get rid of uncertainty in life. This is just a fundamental aspect of it. And so you can change your response instead. Instead of being anxious, you can be curious. And that will give you keys, that will give you solutions to keep on moving forward without having so much of the stress that comes with uncertainty.
Do you think things that hold people back from a curiosity mindset and approach to life comes down to the fact that we have so much information going on right now, and we have seen, and with that we have stories, we have the journeys that people go on, and while most of our journeys are unique, they're also repetitive and very, very similar. Do you think we hold our curiosity back because we kind of think, oh well, this is how it's gone for them, or the environment we're in, and we kind of know the journey that's gone in the first place?
Yes, we feel like there might be a blueprint out there that will tell us exactly how to be successful. And so that's why we have this information. I think they call it infobesity. I can't pronounce this
I've
in
never heard
English,
of
but
that.
yeah, infobesity, where it's like obesity but for information, and we keep on consuming more and more information, sometimes junk information, in the hope that we will find that blueprint, that step-by-step recipe that is going to tell us exactly how to be successful. What's really interesting too is that when we try one of those blueprints, so we might read about it or hear someone talk about it, and it doesn't work for us, we fail, we don't succeed. Very often, what people do is that they don't think something's wrong with the blueprint. They think something's wrong with them. We blame ourselves. And then the cycle repeats itself. We keep on looking for more information and we feel like we need to fix ourselves. So, definitely, having this infinite access to information is probably doing more harm than good.
It's so interesting that people will want to be curious. People know that there is a need to grow through the curiosity, through the information that they take on. But I think also with it comes this idea that they're gaining knowledge at the same time, and actually the knowledge is in the doing. You can know something, but you don't know it until you do it, right? I think of it. I'm learning Spanish, right now. And I I could think I have the information, I know how to learn Spanish, but I don't know how good I'm going to be at it until I actually start learning it and start doing. So there's the information, then there's the knowledge that you gain, but the knowledge is only in the doing. So how do we get people to sort of transfer through those barriers into the doing?
The main change you want to see really is reimagining your relationship to failure. This is why a lot of people keep on consuming information, but are not then applying it and transforming it into knowledge because there's no risk in just consuming information. But there is a risk of failure whenever you take that information and you try to actually apply it. It might not work. And so, really, the first step is changing your relationship to failure and saying, okay, I've read enough. I've listened to enough podcasts now. I have all of that information. This can feel like you're in control and telling yourself, now I'm ready to let go of that illusion of control. And I will actually apply that information and see if it works or not. And I will see this as a very positive, generative process, whatever the outcome is. This is really how scientists relate to uncertainty. What's really interesting is that when a scientist is faced with something they don't quite understand, when they don't know what the outcome is going to be, they don't just try to avoid it. They're actually excited. They feel like, "Oh, that's interesting. What can we learn from this?" And I think that's the mindset that you want to cultivate. Really putting yourself in a situation where you can test the information that you collected, see what kind of knowledge you've generated, and accept the potential failure that might come from this process. And know that whatever the outcome, you can extract knowledge from this failure. And then you can iterate. And that's how you grow.
Through my research through perfectionism, there's a big part of it, which is I won't do this thing until all of the ducks are aligned and everything is perfectly organized. And only then will I make that move when everything is absolutely perfect. But the reality is that it never is. And there never is that moment. And I think that is a big thing that's being driven right now, that's holding people back, because there is so much more of this external validation. And in your book, you say self-packaging rather than self-improvement. So we're so worried about the packaging of ourselves and how we look rather than the actual improvement that will override that. And perfectionism is driven by that. And one of those three mindsets that I've heard you speak about that hold people back are the perfectionist mindset, the cynical mindset, and the escapist mindset. Can you explain those three mindsets, the difference between them?
So the way I visualize them is really like a 2 by 2 matrix. And I look at ambition and curiosity. So if you are highly ambitious, but you don't want to fail, you're solely focused on the outcome and you want to be successful and you don't allow yourself to explore. So you have low curiosity. You don't want to try things that might not work out. You don't want to learn things that don't directly apply to the main outcome you're working towards. Then that's the perfectionist mindset. Very high ambition, but low curiosity. If you're highly curious, so you love exploring, you love trying new things, you might like traveling and connecting with new people, but you don't want to invest the effort that's necessary in order to truly fulfill your potential. So that's high curiosity, low ambition. That's the escapist mindset. And then if you have both low curiosity and low ambition, that's the cynical mindset. And in contrast, I suggest trying to develop what I call an experimental mindset, which is both high ambition and high curiosity. The idea here is that you can be ambitious, you can have big dreams and big aspirations, but also you know that making space for exploration, trying new things, failing, learning from your mistakes, and iterating is actually part of the process of personal and professional growth.
Is it Are those three mindsets naturally more comfortable to be in? Are we sort of biologically built to feel more comfortable within those?
It really depends on your it really depends on your upbringing, in the sense that some people might have grown up in a household with a family that really asked them to be successful at all cost. And so they might develop these perfectionist tendencies. And it's the same for the two others. A lot of them are really self-protection, coping mechanisms. They can feel a little bit more comfortable in the sense that they give you, again, that illusion of control. So if you're a perfectionist, you feel like, I have a plan, I have a vision. I just need to work really hard, not get distracted, and I'll get there. And people around me will be proud and will feel like I've done a good job. If you're in an escapist mindset, you have this idea that if you don't try too hard, there's not really any risk of failure. You're not really trying, right? You're just having fun. So, everything is going to be fine. And rarely think about it this way, but cynicism is also a coping mechanism, a form of self protection. When you tell everyone and yourself that you don't care about anything, you're also not taking any risk of getting hurt.
I found these mindsets interesting because of the fact that so many people will be in them, yet know that they want to be out of them and beat themselves up for being in them, yet stay in this loop of being within them. And I always wonder whether it's really down to just the individual trying to drag themselves out of it and trying to pull themselves out of it, or how much of it is the environment and that external input that is creating their cage that's keeping them within it. Where do you lie with that? How much of it is environment, or how much of it is down to the individual to bring themselves out of these mindsets?
A lot of it, especially when it comes to your default mindsets, is due to your environment. So you will have people around you, again, your education, and it could be also your workplace, the kind of ambitions that people have around you, or the way they relate to ambition in general. All of these factors will have an impact on the kind of default mindsets that you will develop. That being said, it is down to the individual to decide whether they want to pull themselves out of these mindsets and shift their mindset towards a more experimental mindset. I still want to be clear that even me, I've literally written an entire book about this, and I still struggle with these. So it's not really about managing to completely shift from having one of these three default mindsets to having a more experimental mindset. It's really about being better at catching yourself whenever you see that you fall into those perfectionist, cynical, or escapist mindsets, and gently pulling yourself towards a more experimental mindset. I think, again, unfortunately, because of all of those external factors and the pressure that we get from society to be successful in a very specific way, that you will very often find yourself still being pulled towards those default mindsets. The only thing you can do really is becoming progressively better at noticing when you're doing that. So I try to notice as quickly as possible now when I'm falling into these, when I'm saying, oh, I'm being perfectionist right now. Or, sometimes I'll hear myself say I'm not interested in an opportunity. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I care about this. And then I realize that it's actually because I'm kind of scared because it's a really big one. I'm like, oh, cynical mindset here. So it's really about spotting your default mindsets and then gently shifting back to an experimental mindset.
That gentle shifting, I think, is really important for people to understand. I've had this conversation, I actually think in the last month, more than I've ever had it before, which is this understanding of, if you want to shift your mindset, if you want to go to something new, that for some reason we don't give ourselves the grace when it comes to our psychology and our mindset. Yet, if we were to think of our physical situation and our physical state, that we would totally be okay with knowing that I'm going to go to the gym for the next month and I'm going to do 3 times a week. I know at the end of the month, I'm going to see some form of progress, but on day one, I'm not going to see anything. We know that. We're kind of inbuilt that. But for some reason, with our mindset, we think, I am selfish, perfectionistic, I'm cynical, I'm escapist, I'm unhappy and depressed or anxious. And tomorrow I just need to think differently with a snap of fingers and I'm going to be completely different. And if we don't do that, we berate ourselves and we think we are insufficient, we're broken, we can't do it, and or we never will. We never will get there. And that's so wrong. It takes time. Why do we is there any reason behind why we think that if we can just change so quickly?
A lot of our culture says that success is based on self-discipline and willpower. And so whenever you're not able to have those very quick changes, it almost feels like a personal failure. We feel like, I mean, it's just my mind, right? It's just my mind, and I just need to change the way I think. Shouldn't be that hard, right? We kind of forget that our mind is, there's a brain underneath that generates all of these thoughts and these emotions. And yes, the brain is plastic even in adulthood, but that doesn't happen overnight. So it does require repetition. It does require slowly building that self-confidence, that self-belief that you can actually get back in control of your thoughts and your emotions. And it also requires that self-compassion of knowing that it won't always be perfect. Again, I really see it more as a little dance, and knowing that when you kind of lose your balance, you can actually take a couple of steps and feel grounded again, rather than being in this fixed, rigid position where you're not moving. If you want to grow, if you want to build any kind of momentum in your personal or professional life, you are going to lose balance at times. And you can either blame yourself for that or know that this is part of the process, that it is part of growing, and just gently pull yourself back to that mindset without blaming yourself.
I think there's also an element of expectation that people set on themselves through, again, what information they're receiving, that there's people out there that have got this mindset. They are doing the routines, the behaviors, the actions, the thinking that they want to get to. And I'm not there yet. I may not be able to get there. But I think there's also a misunderstanding of what that looks like. And I was really fortunate as a professional athlete to have something happen to me that completely shifted my idea of what an expectation of success should look like. So I had a teammate who ended up being a coach of mine. Eventually, he retired and turned into a coach. And he sat us down as a group of players and he said, how so my sport was cricket, and a good day in cricket as a bowler is that you take 5 wickets in a match, right? That would be like scoring a hat trick in football, and that's like your day. And he said to us, this guy had played over 300 matches, and he said, how many times do you think I took 5 wickets in a match? And we were like, oh, you're an absolute legend of the game. You must have taken over 80. Right? That must have been ridiculously high. And he went 35. And then statistically, he had done it. It was 7% of the days he played were his day. And he said, what do you think I'm doing for the other 93? He's like, so I can want to go and get that fiver. I can want to go get those 5. But I know that it's a 7% chance of that happening. And that's what happened. And he's like, and I was one of the best players to have played the game. And that for me just completely took my expectation of, okay, if it doesn't happen today, if it doesn't go the way I want it to go, if it's not the direction I think it's, or it isn't the best, it isn't the expectation I've set, it's okay. It could be there. Like there could be a 7% day on the horizon. Eventually that will come. And I don't think we give ourselves that chance. We think it needs to be 100%, or at least close to that, or it's a failure.
But that's also the illusion that's created by our current environment and with social media specifically. We're all incentivized to share the days where it went well, not necessarily the ones where it didn't go so well. And so it can really create that illusion that people who are successful all the time, because there's no incentive to talk about those days where you didn't succeed, things didn't go to plan, you were not really happy with your performance. So I think it's harder than ever today to keep that in mind, that most successful people are only successful for a very small proportion of the time. And this is really the compounding effect of keeping on showing up, even after those days where it didn't go so well, that made them successful in the long run.
Mm. Explain what the difference between a linear mindset and an experimental mindset is.
A linear mindset is when your definition of success is based on the assumption that in order to be successful, you need to have a clear vision and a clear plan. So if you want to visualize it, it's really point A, where you are today, point B, where you want to be in the future. And then once you've decided what the outcome, the destination where you want to get to, then just work really hard to get there. And that linear mindset is why a lot of people are miserable whenever they set a goal for themselves, a linear goal, and they try to copy paste a blueprint, a step by step recipe, doesn't work for them. They never get from point A to point B, and then they blame themselves. An experimental mindset is an experimental approach, in contrast, is really the idea that first, you don't always know exactly where you want to go. Where you want to go in your definition of success can actually be very emergent. You take a step and then you figure out, okay, I like this. I want to go more in that direction. And then you take another step. And so you'll get to a point B in the future, but you don't know what that point B is going to be. And when you talk to most successful people, and you ask them, did you know that's where you would end up? Like if you think about yourself 5 years ago and you look at where you are today, did you know that's exactly where you would end up? If they answer honestly, most of them will tell you that they didn't. They kept on showing up. They kept on learning from each iteration. And they kept growing in a way that was highly experimental rather than having this linear fixed plan with a predetermined destination. And so visually, this experimental approach looks more like cycles of experimentation. So you have a little bit of a hypothesis where you might say, I'm actually curious to see what happens if I focus on this, if I try this approach, if I work with this person, if I say yes to this project. Let's do this. Let's learn from this. The outcome might be positive or not. Whatever the outcome, I will learn from this and I will take that new knowledge and apply it in my next cycle of experimentation. So one of them is very linear and the other one is more cyclical.
Going back to the environment and the world around us, it seems as if the world would support more of a linear mindset. It would, whether it's family, friends, society, it would drive you down the linear mindset approach. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. The linear way gives yourself and everyone around you a sense of certainty, which again, for your brain is very reassuring. Telling yourself that you know where you're going, that you have this clear vision, and if only you keep on showing up, you will get there. That's such a nice story to tell yourself and also to tell people around you, your parents, your friends, your partner, your colleagues, and saying, yeah, of course I know where I'm going. Watch me. But we know very often, especially in today's world, that's not what happens.
It would be interesting to know that if there's a way of measuring, and maybe can bring light on this if there is, the neurological or the biological reaction to being in a linear mindset, having that certainty, staying in there, is as high, or if having an experimental mindset and the outcomes of on the other side of that uncertainty, other side of the experimentation, and usually getting more than what you probably ever could have dreamed of, whether that actually has a better effect on you biologically, your brain, and your mindset moving forward. Do you kind of see where I'm going with that? I'm
Yes,
trying to build
there
this question in my mind and theory in my mind of what it would look like. Is yeah.
but there is research around it. What I call an experimental mindset, a lot of psychologists call tolerance to uncertainty. And there has been a lot of research in psychology and neuroscience around it. What's really interesting is that the higher your tolerance to uncertainty, the lower your anxiety when you're facing
Wow.
challenges. And we see that across the board, across many studies. So if you can cultivate that tolerance to uncertainty, you're going to be able to face those challenges, to navigate uncertainty with less anxiety.
Wow. Okay. What would help people build some of those tolerances?
A lot of it comes down to showing to yourself that you're okay when you find yourself in a situation that is uncertain. So actually navigating uncertainty whenever you find yourself facing a challenge, asking yourself, what would it look like to approach this from a place of curiosity instead of anxiety? And then trying something new, taking a small risk. When you do that over and over again, and you see on the other side that whatever the outcome, you're okay. You survived. You're teaching your brain that there is no risk of death, which is the worst outcome for any living organism. There is no risk of death when you take those small risks, when you make those small bets. This is why my book is called Tiny Experiments, because I believe they're the best way to train yourself, to show your brain that it is okay to take those small risks.
I think it's well to prove to yourself, right, to gain the confidence as you go through those experiences. Because again, anything around the psychology of confidence and self-efficacy, your self-belief in something that you do, the best way we know to build it is through experience, is through having positive experiences. But again, it's that, am I okay with taking the small step, the small experiment, the tiny experiment, and get some success there, and then go the next one, and then go next one, rather than I think everyone just wants, again, shoots for the highlight reel, shoots for it. I'm going to be a professional. And we see this in sport, right? We see this in a performance domain, because sport, I always say sport is exaggerated format of everyday events. And it's, you see these athletes doing incredible things, and then a young player will go to try and do this or slam dunk like LeBron James, miss, not get it, and be like, okay, I'm not LeBron. This is not me. And it's like, dude, you didn't even start to build your leg strength to get anywhere near that. So yeah, I think that's how we can start to build the confidence, right? To feel like this is the direction we want to go in.
Yeah, and also knowing that there is not one definition of success. To your point, just sharing those examples, i- that's the so I call this the maximalist brain. It's really this tendency to feel like whatever we do, it has to be big, it has to be impressive, it has to have a massive impact, and it has to be our one true passion. And anything less than that is failure. Anything less than that means that your life has no meaning. But there are so many ways to be successful. There are so many ways to live a meaningful life. It doesn't have to look like LeBron James or whoever. It can be your definition of success. And I think something that's really useful to develop as well, which to me is part of having this experimental mindset, is what psychologists call self complexity. Self complexity is based on the number of identities and ambitions that you have in life. So instead of having only one ambition, one identity, which would be very low self complexity, saying, I just want to be the best athlete in the world. I just want to be a great athlete, and that's it. And when that particular part of your life and your identity doesn't work out, then you completely lose your sense of self. Versus high self complexity, when you say, I want to be a great athlete, but I also want to be a great dad. I want to be a great friend. I want to be a great, whatever, graphic designer, if that's your hobby, or great cook at home. I want to make great meals for my friends. I want to. Then when any of these parts of your life don't work out in the way you want to, and we know most of these things will have seasons, right? There might be parts of your life where your love life is going great, and others where it's not necessarily the case. Where your career as an athlete is going to go great, and others where not. So maybe you'll hurt yourself or something like that. When you have self complexity, you don't have this complete collapse of your identity because you're not just that one thing. You're many other things at the same time.
I have an exercise that I have used and I now use with people that I coach and mentor, It's called Human Being, Human Doing. And
Mm.
it's very simple that you get a piece of paper and you create 2 columns and you put human being and human doing. And the first, you actually start with the last bit first. So you start with the human doing first, and you write down all your roles and responsibilities in the world, right? So you put down that you're a brother, a son, a daughter, a friend, a mother, a father. But then you put down things like you're maybe an entrepreneur, a student, an athlete, but then other things like your hobbies and your interests. So like you're a musician, a dancer, a surfer, a hiker, whatever it might be. You put all of the things that you do, your roles, your responsibilities in the world that you'd have. And on the other side, you go to human being. And these are the characteristics that you either know you have, or you feel people might describe you as, or maybe you even aspire to be like. So it could be curious, it could be adventurous, could be enthusiastic, passionate, driven, hardworking, all the things that you want. Put them all down. And then the cool thing is that you look at those 2 lists and then you draw lines between the ones that you think best describe that attribute that you want to do. And I have found that to first help athletes that I work with, right? So people that are in sport, that they're sort of sitting there going, well, I don't know the type of athlete that I am. I play this sport, but I only define myself based on the results that I get and the outcomes that I have. And I'm also wanting to be like this athlete over here because I admire them. I want to follow their footsteps. But then they kind of lose their real authenticity in what they do because, again, if the outcome doesn't go their way, then they're like, oh, I'm no good. I'm awful. But if they had to just literally say, I'm a hardworking athlete, I'm a driven athlete, or I'm a curious athlete, a venturous athlete, then they know that they can still do that regardless of result. And this comes back to this, what you're talking about of being able to have so much complexity in what you are, but actually there's kind of beauty in that complexity, I think. Because yeah, if one of those fails, so for example, if being the athlete fails, then they're like, well, I'm still a friend. I'm still got surfing. I've still got music to do. I've still got, maybe I'm a student and I can bring that to life. And I know that experience because I've gone through it, having been ripped out of professional sport through injury. And at 26, you're sort of, well, who am I? What am I about? But very fortunately, I had been working on other parts of me. I'd embraced mindfulness as this self-discovery. And then you find I can bring value to the world through other things that I do, more who I am. And actually you find that your value is in that human being, like, because the human doing's not guaranteed.
I love that. I kind of want to make my students try it. It's amazing.
Go for it.
And what I love about it is that it is both about self-discovery, but then it's immediately applicable whenever you find yourself in one of those situations where you start questioning your own sense of self and who you are and what value you bring to the world whenever you're faced with a challenge, and you can go back to that. And I think those are the best tools, the ones where there's an aspect of knowing yourself better. And again, that goes back to information versus knowledge. There's true knowledge being generated here that you can immediately apply.
There's also a sense of when you get external validation and praise for one of those internal goals that you have for yourself. So, for example, this is kind of Carol Dweck's work, right? Being praised for your growth mindset. But for me, if someone is to say, I am driven, I'm hardworking, I really like that now. That for me is like the best form of praise I can get, really. But it was the opposite when I was playing. I remember going into these meetings with my coaches, and they would give me all this feedback, and they'd be like, Lewis, you're the hardest working, courageous, brave player that we've got in the team. And I'm like, yeah, but tell me how good I am at the skills and
Mm.
how good I am as a player. And it wasn't until reflection I was like, why am I letting that go? Why am I missing that? And it was because it just placed so much validation on the externals and the outcomes that you get rather than the internal. But there is nothing better than being sort of validated in the person that you are. I genuinely believe that for me, and just sort of anecdotally thinking, is that is just what lights you up more. And I even see it with young kids now. If you see a young kid, there is nothing more powerful than giving them an encouraging word about them. Yes, they might want to be told that they're good at this, that, and the other. But I promise you, if you say like, dude, I'm happy to be around you because of the person you are, you instantly see their energy change.
But a lot of it comes down to the kind of praise we received as a child, because I think that's what's very sad is that initially, yes, most kids will be really happy to receive that personal validation about who they are as a person. But the more they grow up in a system that seems to only really value those kind of external achievements, the more they learn to value that as well. And so you get to that situation where you just described, right? Where someone will tell you, you're so hardworking, this is amazing. And you're like, no, 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 but I don't care about that. It's not that you naturally don't care about that. It's just that you've been taught that this is the kind of like nice sugar coating kind of compliment that people give you in order to sandwich the actual feedback with it. And so because of that, we don't pay attention anymore when people give us those kind of personal compliments that are true and genuine about who we are as a human being.
How do we start to construct consistency within our experiments? So how do we not only go, yep, I want to run this experiment, I want to be curious. How do we build some form of routine or system around doing it?
So the way I describe designing a tiny experiment always starts with creating a mini protocol for experimentation. And this is inspired by the way scientists actually run their experiments. So when a scientist wants to design an experiment, they only need two things. They need to know what they're going to try and the trial period. So same with your tiny experiments, you need to know what is the action you're going to explore and what is the duration. So the big difference with a goal here is that with a goal, you have this very binary definition of success. You're trying to get to a specific outcome. And if you don't get there, that's failure. With a tiny experiment, the only thing you're trying to do here is learn something new. Self-discovery, learning something about your work, learning something about the world, generating new knowledge. That's the only thing you're trying to do here. The difference with a habit also is that there is a duration. With a habit, you say, I'm going to do this thing for the rest of my life. With a tiny experiment, you say, I'm just going to try it for this duration. So what I encourage people doing is to always make sure that they have at least one tiny experiment running. And this is really how you build this consistency, by saying that at any point, there is one thing in your life, in your work, that you're trying to explore from a place of curiosity, asking yourself, what could be different here? Maybe I've been following this routine for years, but I feel like something's not quite working. Is there a slightly different way I can do this? And again, I'm not trying to get to a specific destination, specific outcome. I'm not committing to it for the rest of my life. This is just a tiny experiment. Let me give it a try.
Do people tend to try and do too many, try to have too many packs at once?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is back to the experimentalist mindset, which is high ambition and high curiosity. And so a lot of people who want to experiment, when they first hear about how to design tiny experiments, they get really excited and they say, let me run 5 or 10 different ones at the same time. And I tell them, wait, slow down. So again, think about the way a scientist design an experiment. If you're running 1,000 different experiments at the same time, it's going to be really hard to know which variables are having an impact. So if you change your entire routine, you're not going to know what's helping and what's not helping. So that's one of the reasons why you only want to ideally run one experiment at a time. Another reason is that in order to be able to make decisions about your routines and the way you work and the way you organize your life, you need to complete the experiment. And if you're running so many of them at the same time that it becomes overwhelming, you'll probably just abandon them in the middle. So this is also why I call them tiny experiments. If you're hesitating in between running an experiment for a duration of 3 months or 2 months, go for 2 months. Hesitating in between 3 months and 2 weeks, go for 2 weeks. Your experiments can be very tiny. What matters is that you actually complete them so you can look back and ask yourself, okay, did that help? Do I want to keep going? Do I need to tweak anything? So one experiment at a time. the only exception I allow when people say, "Are you sure? Can't I run a couple?" I say, okay, if you really want to run a couple of experiments at the same time, they need to be in completely different areas of your life. So maybe you have one experiment where you change the way you run meetings at work, and then an experiment where you try different ways to meal prep. They're so different that they probably don't have any overlap in terms of variables. Go ahead if you really want to run two at the same time.
This one's really interesting for I've actually found myself in the world of tennis a little bit more, and that's really interesting because there's a very short period of time for growth and development, because all the way from junior level to professional ATP World Tour, the schedule is just wild. There's argument that they're making that schedule wild for themselves because they're choosing to play, but there's this ethos within you just play, and you get very short periods of development. And I've actually been able to impact the players I've been with because I took something that I had from my world, which was in my skill set when I played, we weren't able to actually train for very long because actually doing the skill set caused damage to the body and you needed it for preservation. So you got really good at using constraints to develop something. So we would have, say, half an hour to train, and if I wanted to improve something, I had to, within it, try to build confidence in what I already had and the strengths that I had, but then also throw in this kind of tiny experiment of something new that I wanted to develop. And then you would do it for maybe another 15, 20 minutes, and then you'd bolt on the back end 10 minutes of strength, developing your strengths and sort of repairing everything. But in tennis, they very seldomly want to break out of how things have been done because they're so adverse to breaking what they've done in the past and what they've gained and what's got them there, and trying something new because it could remove all of that. It could undo all of that work. There's this fear that it's going to remove all of that. So I had thrown them this idea of viewing your progress kind of like how a long distance runner schedules their training. So elite marathon runners run at 80% at zone 2, easy running, call it the Kenyan shuffle, where they're just almost out there, could almost run with a coffee in their hand. And they would be very faster for an elite compared to what I could do. But then one day, 20%, one day of their training is this threshold training that stretches them, that pushes them. And that is the kind of tiny experiment. It's not doing it every day and growing, trying to stretch and pull yourself every day. So I wonder about the repetition of it, the consistency, and how often to run those experiments. And then also, how do you know whether it's working in terms of, do I continue with it? Am I on the edge of that tipping point of when this experiment could really give me what I want? Or am I just kind of going down a road where it may not work, but I'm just, there's a sunk cost bias into what I'm doing here.
Yeah, you're touching upon a very important point. A lot of people, before actually reading my work, when they hear about developing an experimental mindset, might have the assumption that I'm saying, just change everything all the time, experiment with everything, and just have fun. And that's really not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is make sure that at any point in your life, you have at least one experiment running. So that really helps with, again, with the consistency, because you're just inserting a tiny experiment as part of everything else in a way that actually feels sustainable. People think that running a tiny experiment is about necessarily adding something new to your routine. It doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can be just tweaking a way you've been doing things. One of my favorite tiny experiments that everybody can do, if you're not already doing that, is saying, I will not bring my phone in the bedroom with me for the next 2 weeks. Action duration. This is not going to add any additional work. It's not going to take any additional time out of your schedule. And then you can just pay attention to whether this is having a positive impact on your sleep, your mood, your productivity during the day, just the way you feel in general. So for the consistency aspect, the most important part is designing your experiments in a way that feels sustainable. If when you design your pact where you say action and duration, it already feels overwhelming at this stage, the experiment is probably not small enough. Go smaller for now. The great thing is that because those are cycles of experimentation, the idea is that if it feels like it's working, even if it's not perfect, you can iterate. You can always go for a more ambitious experiment. So if you did it for 2 weeks and you liked it, you can say, let me go for 2 months now because I feel like this is actually helping. So that's for the consistency aspect. As to how do you know whether this works or not? It can be really helpful to define in advance. I don't really, it's a hypothesis, not in the very scientific sense of the term, right? You're not going to measure anything. There are no spreadsheets involved, but just asking yourself, what are you hoping to achieve with this experiment? What is your intuition? And that's kind of a hypothesis because when you design to run an experiment, the kind of hypothesis that you have is that this is going to help with something. Maybe it's going to help with your sleep, again, with your mood, your performance. Maybe it's going to help with just communication, relationships with people you work with. And so just writing that down and saying, I think that by running this tiny experiment, I will feel more confident when talking with the rest of the team. By running this tiny experiment, I think I'm going to sleep a little bit better, which will make me feel better during the day. Just writing that down. And at the end of the experiment, I have a very simple tool I recommend using that will allow you to know whether it worked or not. So I call that plus minus next. It has 3 columns. The first column, plus, you write everything that went well. In the second column, minus, everything that didn't go so well. And in the last column, next, I like to draw a little arrow here. You write everything you might want to tweak. If you were to run the experiment again and iterate, what would you change? That could be the duration, that could be the action. Maybe you experimented with that thing every morning for 2 weeks. Maybe you feel like that was kind of challenging. Maybe you want to do it in the evening instead for the next iteration. And so in the next column, you say how you're going to iterate. And this is how you create those cycles of experimentation. This is how you close the loop, making sure that you extract the knowledge from that current iteration and use it for the next iteration.
What about how it feels? So how the experiment's gone well and it's worked, but I hate it. It doesn't make me feel good.
Thanks. Thanks for asking this. Very, very important to always consider the internal signals of success and the external signals of success. We're very good as a society at paying attention to external signals of success. The stats, the numbers, the metrics, and whatever ways of measuring performance that we have. But we rarely pay attention to the internal metrics of success. So I'm just going to give you a quick example, but last year, everybody around me said, you need a YouTube channel. The future is YouTube. You need to be on YouTube. And so that got me curious. And I said, okay, I'll run an experiment. And so I said, I'm going to publish a weekly YouTube video until the end of the year. And that was for a couple of months. So I did that, completed the experiment. And at the end of it, I looked at both the internal and external signals when I was doing my plus minus next. And the external signals look pretty good in terms of numbers of subscribers and likes and comments and all of those kinds of performance metrics you would look at when you're trying to grow a YouTube channel. The internal signals, not so good. I noticed that every time I had to sit down and record a YouTube video, I was dreading it. And because I was dreading it, any day I was supposed to record, I was procrastinating on everything else because of my anxiety. So this was also having a negative impact on a lot of my other projects. And that brings me to a very important part of conducting experiments. There is no binary definition of success and failure again. All you're trying to do is learn something new. In this case, I learned that YouTube was not for me. And so I stopped recording YouTube videos at the end of that experiment. And when you have this experimental mindset, you know that learning that something is not for you Learning that something is not working for you, is not aligned with your aspirations or your working style, that's also growth.
What about the other way around, though? This is the one I'm actually super interested in, is when you're doing something, you absolutely love it, yet you're not getting the external outcomes, and it's not there. And I find that as a really tough place to be in, because it kind of cut. I always think of Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point, that it's, where is it? And when could it be? Is it 2 weeks' time? Is it 3 months' time? Is it 3 years? Is it 10 years? Where that eventually, that chipping away, that work that you do eventually pays off. And I only say that through experience when it comes to, say, something like professional sport. I set my goal of being a professional athlete at the age of 13, 14. I didn't sign a contract till I was 20. And so I think of the progression graph of everything. It's just stagnation for 6.5 years, but then the last 6 months would be this exponential spike in growth and opportunity and success that came extrinsically. So how do people navigate that, where they love something that they're doing, but they're not seeing the outcome?
This is why you have to fall in love with the experimental process. So, again, if you talk to people who are highly successful in their field, they actually loved the process of trying new things, learning from their mistakes, and iterating. You have to fall in love with that process. There is no way this is going to be sustainable if all you're thinking about is the goal at the end and you're hating every single moment in between where you are today, point A, and point B in the future. That in between, that messy middle where you're not quite sure how you're going to get there, you're not quite sure whether something's going to work, and you're really just experimenting to try to figure it out, you have to fall in love with that process. That's really the only way you can make it sustainable. This is again something that you see in scientists. They love the process of figuring it out. And so, any way you can make it enjoyable for you to love that process is going to help in terms of sustaining that effort over time. For some people, that might mean working, collaborating with people you enjoy spending time with. So, if you're doing a team sport, for example, maybe finding that one person on the team that you really like hanging out with and spending time with them around your practice. And so having this fun aspect, accountability aspect of it. For other people, it might be, again, carving out some time outside of the daily routines to just have fun and experiment. Try something new where you don't know what's going to happen, but you're keeping this connection with the playful aspect of whatever it is that you're trying to become really good at. So yeah, fall in love with the experimental process and fall in love with that messy middle that you'll have to go through. Because as you said, you don't know when that point B, that tipping point is going to happen. So better almost putting it out of your mind and really focus on the process itself.
What about bringing other people into your journey? So letting other people be a part of that process, or just be there to hold you accountable. I know in your book you talk about learning in public, and I always thought of that part of the book as being, learning in public being about not only showing and exchanging ideas, but actually a bit of an accountability thing, that I know I'm going to have to show up to do this. I know I'm going to have to show up to this pack that I've given myself, and there's probably power in that, right? Than bringing people in.
Absolutely. There is a temptation, especially if you're highly ambitious, to wait until you feel like you're the expert and you're good enough at the thing you're trying to achieve to kind of start sharing your journey with others, right? And a lot of people kind of do that. Only once they're successful, they start telling people about the process. Learning in public is about making sure that you share the journey while you're actually figuring it out, not when you feel like you're the expert and you know everything. And there are many benefits to that. There's the accountability part that you mentioned. So if you know that you have at least one other person in the world that is aware of your journey and who's waiting to have those updates from you, then it will make you more likely to show up. And that can be very simple. That can just be practicing together or even outside of practice, even for people who actually work on different things. So in sports, that could be also different things, like having that one coffee every Sunday and doing a little check-in. How are you feeling? External signals, internal signals. Tell me everything. How are you feeling? So that accountability is going to really encourage you to keep on showing up. Another really important benefit of learning in public is just the consolidation of your knowledge. We know that one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And you don't have to teach in any formal way, right? You don't have to start creating lectures around the everything that you're learning, but just talking about it, saying out loud some of the questions that you've been thinking about, some of the doubts that you might have, some of the new things you discovered that week is very helpful in order to consolidate that knowledge. Again, going from information to knowledge and really embodying that knowledge so you can then apply it in a better way in the future.
I love that. What Okay, to round this off, if someone is sitting there going, "Okay, I wanna move from this linear mindset to an experimental mindset. I've got 1,001 different experiments that I think I could run in my life." Where do people start to kinda set a stake in the ground and go, "This is the experiment I wanna run first"?
So deciding on your experiment always starts with observation. So even if you feel like you have 1,000 experiments that you would like to run, I would really encourage you to practice that little self-anthropology exercise of just observing for a little while how you're doing things. And then, in terms of deciding what the first one might be, think about the potential impact that it could have and think about the current feasibility of the experiment. So, potential impact, if you were right in terms of how this could help in general, again, that idea of a hypothesis, how helpful could that be? So maybe meal prep, your exercise routine or whatever, like if you implemented that change, how impactful could that be? Second, can you get started right now with your current resources? And by current resources, I don't mean necessarily just money. I mean your time, your energy, and your attention. So, with all of your other commitments and the energy levels that you have, the time that you have, what is an experiment that is small enough that you can very easily get started right now? What's most important is to get started. So, get started with the tiniest experiment possible right now. And then again, you can iterate and you can go more ambitious in your next iterations.
We do a we do an exercise sometimes with athletes, as a self-discrepancy. It's based off self-discrepancy theory, which is the discrepancy between this ideal self that you have of yourself and where you want to be. And the exercise is to create a list of all the characteristics that you wish to have in the future, or what you think would make the best version of you in whatever it is that you're doing. So if it's a sport, you say, right, what is going to make me the best basketball player, best tennis player? Like, what are the attributes of the best? And then you assume that you want to hit 10 out of 10 for everything. So you then say, where am I on those? But it's not just skills or physical attributes, but it's also the emotional and the mental attributes. So I want to have confidence, self-belief. And then when you get people to write that down and write a list of where they number themselves and use just a simple 1 to 10 scale, you will find that they say, "Oh, I'm 3 out of 10 confidence." But then you kind of go down and they say, "Oh, if they're a tennis player, my second serve accuracy, they want it to be really high. They believe that to be a really big skill, but mine is also, it's about a 2 out of 10." And you kind of ask them and go, "Okay, well, if we were to put some time and effort into second serve accuracy, would that build your confidence?" And some people want to shoot for that confidence first and then actually forget the thing that's underpinning it and building this foundational layer. So there's this ability to layer upon, okay, if I'm to run this experiment now, what's the benefit? What could it kick onto? And how could it maybe benefit all of the other elements? Would that be a smart way to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the no phone in the bedroom experiment is one of my favorite ones to get people started with because it's very easy to start and it can have the downstream effects are really, really good for such a small change. and it can have positive effects on physical health and mental health, emotional health. So that's what I mean by thinking about the potential impact, the downstream effects of that experiment if you were to complete it, and then knowing how feasible it is. And very important to keep in mind that your hypothesis might be incorrect. So it might be that this is actually not helping. We know for some experiments that we have enough studies around them with large samples that it's very likely it's going to be helpful. But that being said, a lot of people say meditation is helpful for a very small proportion of the population. It can create more anxiety. So it's not because something is working for everybody else around you that it is going to work for you. So it is worth experimenting, even with things where it's supposed to be common knowledge that they're working for everyone.
What are you personally experimenting on right now? What's your tiny experiment that you're currently running?
I have a bit of a weird one, has nothing to do with work. I'm experimenting with learning about one new medicinal plant every week for 12
Wow.
weeks. And the reason why was just first because I was curious about that general area of knowledge. I know nothing about that. And so I like using experiments just to explore my curiosity. And second, it's a very non-screen based kind of experiment. And after my book launch, I really wanted something that forced me to go outside. So part of my experiment, I'm based in the UK. And so all of the plants are plants that you can find in the UK. And part of my experiment every week is to go and try and find the actual plant outside. So it forces me to go outside, take a little walk, and really pay attention to my surroundings. So there's the knowledge generation aspect, but also it's been really good for my mental health.
Wow, that's amazing. Where's the best place to send people to follow what you're doing, to sign up, subscribe to what you're doing?
So they can go to nesslabs.com where I write a weekly newsletter where I write about lots of the topics we talked about today. On all social media, I'm at Nuran, and my book, Tiny Experiments, is available anywhere books are sold.
Thank you so much for giving your time today, Anne-Laure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode with Anne-Laure and you want to enjoy even more episodes of the show, but you don't know where to start, we put together some of the best ones for you to get going with. They're in a playlist and we're going to put it around about here.